Hi guys, welcome to Women Who podcast. My name is Meredith and I am a soul purpose coach. This week I am joined by Pippa, who is a dating and relationship coach. Thank you so much for being here, Pippa.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
So I suppose what I really wanted to dive into with you first was your perspective on what problems or challenges couples and single people are facing most in 2023.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And actually, I read an article about this recently. So obviously the sort of challenges that someone who's looking for love and someone who's in a relationship face are going to be different. But there are some sort of common narratives that are kind of being put around the universe, around sort of like the environment we live in now, where people are less committed. People have more options available to them. People have, so much convenience when it comes to dating and relationships that there's, just using an app, there's a better option available. And, this is sort of the kind of narrative that I'm really hearing at the moment. But I really, it's a challenging one because I don't want to ignore the fact that obviously the dating landscape has changed and the relationship landscape has changed with, say, social media and with dating apps. But I also think sometimes we put so much emphasis onto these external factors where I actually think a lot of the challenges that we have on our love life and in our relationships and in our in our dating experiences comes down from a lack of our own relationship with ourselves and our own relationship with our self-worth, and understanding how we've been affected by the experiences that we've had in our life, whether that's your past relationships, whether that's how you were raised, whether that's whether you fit in school, all of these sort of internal dynamics that go on. And I think we're very quick to say, okay, well, it's just because dating apps have made dating super convenient, rather than say, okay, actually maybe there's something in me that's drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable. I think a lot of the challenges and the narrative at the moment is putting it on the external world. And I don't want to ever say like none of these things are legitimate, because there are some truth to external factors, but I always think that every generation has had their challenges, unique challenges when it comes to love. There was a time really not that long ago where women weren't earning money, and so they had a lot less choice. They probably had to stay in relationships that they weren't happy in. And I only kind of use that for contrast of sort of how it's going to evolve even more, and the choice becomes whether we're going to let it always be something external as to why we can't have the relationship we want, or whether we're going to take responsibility with compassion and say, okay, like what parts of me are creating this challenge that I'm facing in my love life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I can definitely see/relate to that in terms of it's not just in relationships that we do this as humans, like we do this everywhere. It's so much easier for us to look outwards and kind of place blame and sort of responsibility on something that's we can see, as opposed to reflecting inward and being like, actually, I don't feel worthy enough to be loved by someone. And that's actually what's causing me the problems.
Yeah,
So
it can be really hard.
yeah, it is. And like that's actually way more painful than just placing it on something else, So what would you say, what's something that's coming up then in terms of the difference between people who are single and versus people who are in relationships? Like what's the main issue among people in relationships at the moment?
In relationships, I mean, I think one of the main challenges in relationships is the fact that we aren't taught how to have healthy long-term relationships, and that we are expected to just get the relationship, get the partner, and live happily ever after. And I think, that is obviously the dream, and you do have to be with the right person, but whoever you choose to spend your life with, and that's what it is a choice. And it's not just a choice you make once, it's not just a choice you make on your wedding day, it's a choice that you have to make daily. And I think we've not learned or been taught how to essentially really work on that relationship and learn how to communicate vulnerably. And to be honest, that's the same thing that we see in dating too. We've not been taught how to ask for what we want. We've not been taught how to express our needs. We've not been taught how to create space for our partner to do the same thing. And, the first hurdle we come to in relationships is making sure we're with the right person, but also releasing the idea that there's going to be a one perfect person in every aspect, and that you're never going to come up against challenge, because you are. And really the strength of a couple is how they work with that challenge. And also a kind of an important thing to know within you is like, what is a challenge that you're willing to work on, and what is a challenge that is a non-negotiable for you? So for example, if someone is treating you badly, they may be gaslighting you or neglecting you or won't let you express your needs, something like that, quite, big challenges, you can't necessarily fix those. However, if it comes down to you're in a relationship and, you've been having no quality time, or you're feeling like you need something more and you don't know how to express it, it's about knowing, I guess, what challenges are worth working on and what challenges are firm, this isn't going to work in the long term. And that can be hard, it can be hard to know those things. But I think that's really what couples face at the moment, is the expectation that they never have to work on the relationship once it happens. And also not only that expectation, but not knowing how to do so, like how to invite that in, and also not being receptive to it. So it's all very well, I'm obviously someone who works on my relationship a lot because I'm in this industry. But if I didn't have a partner who was super receptive to the ideas that I have or the conversations that I want to have, and they dismissed it, or they thought it was silly, or, they were unable to meet me where I was at, we would not be able to grow in that relationship. So I think people in relationships, that's the biggest challenge that they're facing.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think something that kind of comes to mind when you talk about that is like how consciousness and communication is just so key. Like how so many of my relationships got in like times gone by, those two things have been missing, and it's just been like, it's really sad because you do really like love that person, but like you're not able to communicate without someone feeling triggered or hurt, or like saying something without criticism, just something that you're feeling, and that person being like, that's a threat to me and that I need to react, and becoming quite reactive. Like I think in my experience, I've been in quite reactive relationships. And something that I've found, or like slowly kind of become aware of, is how when you're so used to a reactive environment, or like, let's say a version of love that's probably quite toxic, when you're confronted with a secure version of love that is like communicative, that is conscious, that is patient, that is loving, that is accepting, all of those things, that actually is like extremely triggering. That's something I realized recently. Like that's actually more triggering, because the other one feels familiar. To be with someone who's reactive and dismissive and critical is more familiar than to be with someone who's patient, kind, loving, and communicates,
Yeah, definitely. And we see it a lot, like sometimes as well when I work with clients. And honestly, my experience too, because all I had before my healthy relationship was toxic situationships. Like I can't even call any of them proper relationships. It was often me just clinging on to the idea of someone, taking nuggets of what they say and creating a whole fantasy in my mind. And that was my experience. And honestly, like had I not worked on myself to actually think, okay, like this is what I want, this is, I say it to my partner all the time, like if I'd met you 3 or 4 years ago, we wouldn't be together, because I would just not have been able to hold that relationship. Because to be honest, I was so addicted to a cycle of wanting to like prove myself and wanting to work for that reassurance and wanting to like, it didn't feel safe, but for some reason that lack of safety was exciting. That was chemistry for me. Those were all of those symptoms. That's very common with someone who has like an anxious attachment style. And sometimes we can also associate secureness or good communication with like boring, like this isn't going to be exciting. And that's a conversation I've had with clients before, especially if you've maybe grown up in like a household where you've had a parent who's absent, so you almost had to work for their affection, or you felt you had to work for your affection when you were younger. And I think you have to be able to hold that relationship. I think it's also important to remember that like no one is going to be 100% secure. Like there's very few people on this planet who don't have any triggers or any insecurities. And I don't think they exist, to be perfectly honest. But it's like, okay, what can I take responsibility for? And having that communication. So I'd be lying to say that I never got triggered now. But the difference is, if I'm triggered now, I will reflect on it, I'll understand, and I'll communicate to my partner, okay, this is where it's come from. It's come from this experience that I've had in my past. And then he can meet me where I'm at, and vice versa. Like if you're able to actually say, okay, you know what, instead of you've done something wrong, you've made me angry, you've made me upset, you say, okay, why am I so annoyed at this? Like, why has it bothered me so much? Where has this come from? And sit with it and contemplate it and think about it. And then you'll pinpoint something. And when you've pinpointed something, you can go to your partner and say, look, I reacted because of this situation in the past, and it brought up this. And I don't expect you to fix it, but I just want you to know why I reacted like that. And just by doing that, opening up that vulnerability, it's not going to say you're never going to get triggered again. But if you can, rather than judge yourself for it and blame someone else for how you feel, take responsibility and look back in compassion and be like, okay, this is where it's coming from. And then bring that to the relationship. Your relationship is supposed to be a facility for growth. It's not like you have to be perfect and get into a relationship and always be perfect and always communicate perfectly. It's not. It's that you need to identify, okay, when you're single, you need to be thinking about why in my past have I attracted those relationships? You need to be contemplating, and you need to be working on your own healing, your own self-worth. I really recommend when you're single doing that. But then also when you're in that relationship, it will be an evolution. And like, that's why couples who've been together longer and longer tend to fight less and less, because they've learned each other's, triggers. They've understood it. They understand, like, it should be a facility for growth as well, but that will only come from that open communication. And you have to take responsibility for your side.
I completely agree. I also think something I said to a friend recently, that I feel is quite relevant, is the fact that when we are in a relationship with someone, there's a difference between taking responsibility for their triggers and just being mindful of them. Because if you're taking responsibility, you're trying to fix and you're trying to tread on eggshells or like whatever. But if you're just being mindful, you're just like, okay, I know that this is an area in which my partner feels like a little bit more insecure, and that's okay. So I'm just going to be mindful of what I say and how I say it. That's something that I really wish I knew when I was like 19, 20.
Yeah, definitely. And I like that. And also, but I would also like add to that as well, like it's also that person's responsibility to share that with you. So for example, if your trigger is ex-partners, for example, something like that, and your partner might know and recognize, okay, but why, like there's nothing to be worried about, why doesn't she trust me, it's my responsibility, if I'm the one with that trigger, to say, this is why I have this trigger, because of this situation, this situation, this situation. And that will give them the context they need to really truly be mindful and compassionate towards it. But yeah, I think you're totally right. At the end of the day, your triggers are your responsibility, but love is about accepting someone. Love is about being present with them and looking to understand them. And as long as they are being conscious in it too, if I'm triggered and I'm blaming that person for why I'm triggered, it's very hard for that person to be mindful, to be like, okay, well, this is why. But if I'm saying I'm triggered and this is why, they'll have that context that they need. So yeah, it's a really beautiful dynamic, and it really is a combination of working on yourself, being reflective of yourself, choosing to consciously take responsibility for how you show up in your relationship, but then also offering that love, acceptance, and compassion for your partner so that they can do the same.
Yes, I completely agree. Okay then, so I really liked what you mentioned earlier about working on your self-worth when you are like single and not in a relationship. what would you say to, let's say, women who are like single at the moment and looking to work on themselves as opposed to consistently hunting for relationships?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing you need to get really clear on is what stopped you, what's been holding you back from love so far. And even making a list of like every person that you've previously been with, whether it was a relationship, whether it was dating someone for a few weeks, anyone that you felt like you had a connection with. And, you know, it doesn't have to be every single one of them, but you can pick some poignant people out and ask yourself, like, what was at play here? You know, because to start to really understand what your pattern is, you know, like I mentioned earlier, my pattern was chasing people who really weren't that interested in me and didn't want to commit to me, but thinking I could prove to them that I was great. And you know, that was my cycle, rather than going off what someone was actually doing, how they were actually behaving towards me. So first of all, I'd do some reflection, look back at your past, and then also ask yourself, like, what are my thoughts? Like, how do I feel around dating right now? What are the things that I'm telling myself? What are the things that I'm telling my friends? You know, are you saying all men are trash? Because, you know, if you're talking like that, if you're thinking like that, if your language is like that, it's going to be very hard for you to enjoy dating. If you're always thinking like, you know, dating is just like so hard, I hate dating apps, or, you know, and you don't have to meet someone via dating app, but if you're constantly having a lot of negative thoughts around it, start to notice and become aware of those thoughts. And then the big thing is to ask yourself, like, with the self-worth piece, is, do you really believe you are worthy of love? And if not, why? And the reason why you got to ask why is because you would need to get deeper into the stories that you're attaching to yourself. So, for example, when I was struggling with my self-worth in relationships, I was also really struggling with my body image. I was also really struggling to, you know, I had a lot of beliefs in my head about how I was too much, you know, I had too much personality, I was too sassy, you know, I wasn't just like a nice, sweet girlfriend material, you know, something that I thought was really kind of projected when I was, you know, in my teenage years was like, there's, you know, wife, girlfriend material, and then there's like people who are too much. And I took on a label of sort of being too much and feeling like, you know, and that was one of the reasons why I thought I was not worthy of love. So asking yourself, like, why do you think you're not worthy of love? You know, what are the things that you think make someone worthy of love as well? And the truth is, when you do that, you'll also be like kindness, you know, you'll be like compassion, interesting, things like that. And then you'll be like, actually, I have those qualities. So it's actually a really nice exercise to do, because I think otherwise you get caught up in the stories that you're telling yourself about why you're not good enough. And the truth is, like, you are good enough. Like, there's not a single person on this planet who doesn't deserve love. Every single person does. You know, there's no one size fits all. You know, no baby is born into this world not deserving love, and that doesn't disappear. We all do deserve love. So it's about understanding why you think you're not good enough for it and getting really clear on that. So I think those are the main sort of things that I'd be focusing on: looking at your past patterns, understanding your thoughts and beliefs around your own self-worth, and then also your sorts of thoughts and beliefs around dating. I think that would be a good place to start for your own internal healing. Now, obviously, taking action is going to be important to meeting your person, but if you're just at that point of wanting to do some reflection, that's where I'd start.
Yeah, nice. Okay. And then something that I think I have loved to kind of investigating and like talking about recently is like the impact of feminine and masculine energy. That dynamic can be played out, let's say, in relationships. Because I know for my relationships in times gone by, I've definitely like acted way too much in my masculine, and I've tried to like play the role of like more of a provider because that's where I felt comfortable. That's where I was in the rest of my life. So I was like, this is who I am. I'm just someone who like is the doer. I am the like I've always got my shit together, like that sort of narrative. And I think a lot of women fall into that because of like hustle culture and like being a girl boss and like all of this messaging that we're getting. And as much as I think that that's served a purpose in empowering us females, it's created a space in the like in relationship dynamics, both in like heterosexual and like any kind of relationship, be it whatever gender, when feminine and masculine energies are kind of out of whack, or not properly kind of honored or imbalanced, there's a weird dynamic that's set up. And I know that I can definitely like relate to creating a space where the masculine in my relationship didn't feel comfortable because I was taking on that role.
Such an interesting topic. I have so much to say on it.
Can't wait.
So I've really thought about this long and hard for like the past couple of years, because I think there's so much truth to it, but I also think there's some limitations around sort of the messaging behind it at the moment. So I guess to kind of give everyone like a little bit of background if they've not heard of masculine feminine dynamics, but it's sort of the idea that there are certain qualities, that sort of yin energy, which belong to sort of the feminine. So that's like openness, vulnerability, softness, nurturing, creativity, and it's like a being energy. So it's a really receptive energy. And then you've also got masculine energy, which is like the yang energy, which is more about doing, it's more strategic, it's more focused, it's more leadership, it's more in the mind, whereas like the feminine is more in the body, it's more in intuition, whereas the masculine is kind of more in logic. And the truth is, like, we all have both of these energies within us, and different relationship dynamics are going to bring out different parts of us. So if we have, I think the biggest challenge with femininity and masculinity right now and that sort of girl boss culture is vulnerability. It has not been seen as a strength, and vulnerability is a super feminine quality. Vulnerability is what is the foundation of any good relationship, because you cannot form connection if you do not let people see parts of you. However, if you've been hurt in the past from an ex, you've been betrayed, you've been cheated on, and you've learned that actually I'm going to be really successful, and you tap into your masculine energy, and then you go out and date and you're dating from that place, you're not going to form those connections because you are not able to be vulnerable, because you've got a shield up, a masculine shield, they sometimes call it. Now, I think what is really important is I think it's really important as well to not use these tools as a way to make yourself feel like you're not enough. Because I've fallen into that trap myself, where I thought, well, I'm not doing this enough. I'm not being this enough. This is why this is happening. And, I'm not being soft enough, or I'm not being nurturing, I'm not being feminine enough. I've fallen into that trap before. I'm not being receptive enough. And the reason why I think it's important to acknowledge this is because when you're trying to force yourself to be something you're not, you're already not being in your feminine energy, because you can't logic yourself into your feminine. You have to feel comfortable to be there. So I always am a bit wary of, I just think that the only downside of it can be that people will think that they're not enough because they might have some masculine traits or whatever it is. Now, where it's really interesting is if you're in a relationship, and in my relationship, I'm definitely it's quite amusing like how contrasting my partner and I are. Like, I'm very intuitive, I'll listen to my feelings, I'm very emotional. My partner's very disciplined and logical, and we really embody those two traits, and that really suits me. That's something that I was always very attracted to. So I think the problem is if you want someone, if you're a woman and you are a girl boss, but you're wanting someone who takes care of you, who's a provider, who's a protector, and you're dating from your masculine, you're actually going to repel those types of people, and you're probably going to attract in people in their feminine. So that's where the big challenge comes in. Likewise, if you're in a relationship and you're wanting your partner to take the lead, to plan dates, to whatever it is, like take care of you or make a plan or whatever it is, you want them to really take control, but you're the one taking control of every situation. That's going to really lead to a balance being off. And it's also ultimately coming down to the fact that maybe you do not trust the masculine. You don't trust that they will step up and take the lead, or they will make the plan. So you feel like you have to do it. And definitely when I used to date, I was in that sort of needing to control every outcome stage. I was very in my masculine. I thought if I could control everything, then I couldn't get hurt, everything would be fine. But the problem is that if you're trying to control everything, you're not leaving any space for that masculine to come in and take control. So where this is really important to think about is, in those relationship dynamics where you feel like, maybe there's a lack of attraction to your partner or vice versa. It might be because your sort of polarity between the masculine and feminine is off. Or if you're single and you're wanting that sort of, I always just think of like a Viking man as like the masculine. That's like the image I go to. And you're wanting that sort of like warrior, leader, protector, super masculine person, but you keep attracting guys who you're not finding that sort of chemistry and connection with. That's where it's to be wary. Now, I recently did like a masterclass on this, and I think there's 4 common traits of femininity that I think we could all benefit from in dating and relationships. And that's the vulnerability that I mentioned earlier. That's also the sort of intuition, and kind of like allowing yourself to lean back, because when you lean back, you allow others to show you how they feel. So if I'm not trying to, with my partner, for example, when we first started dating, he planned, the first few dates, he really took me out. And I think I had really just got to a point where I just wanted to do everything differently. I just wanted to relax into things. I wanted to just be in my radiance and live life and enjoy it. And I was super open. And I knew, I had that masculine energy in me that said, I will walk away from anyone who doesn't treat me well. So that was like a strong masculine boundary that I had within me. And that then allowed me to really tap into my femininity. So then that radiance piece of really like, and radiance isn't about, it's not about what you look like. It's about how you feel in your skin and how you take care of yourself and how you nurture yourself. So I think those are the sort of core qualities to start thinking about. And, even something I've noticed with clients is like, I'll sometimes say, sometimes we really want to control like the conversations on dating apps and stuff like that. And I'll say, just try leaning back a little bit. And it's only after they were feeling like, oh, they're not making any effort, I'll be like, just try leaning back. And more often than not, when you do that, the masculine will tend to, make more effort. So there's power in those feminine qualities, but they do need that masculine boundaries within you as well. So I always think of like the fire and the water you need within you when you're dating. You need the fire, which is the masculine that says, I will not be treated like shit. And then you need the water in you that's saying, I'm open to love, I'm receptive to love, I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to soften. So you need the kind of balance of the two.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and I love the way that you've kind of narrated that in such a beautiful way. I think I'm definitely like, it reminds me of how I used to approach like relationships, especially when I was more in my masculine and I didn't know how to lean backwards. And there's someone in my life at the moment, a friend of mine, who she like will just like A, put up with a lot of crap, and B, will just be at every beck and call that her situationship like gives her. So maybe he won't reply for a week, and then as soon as he does, she'll reply. And it's like, I've told her so many times to just lean back and like to be more in her feminine and trust in herself. But like, I think that's something that's so absent among women of our age and of our generation, is it kind of, for me, comes back to worthiness, of understanding that the radiance that you have is exactly as you said. It doesn't come from stuff that's external. It comes from knowing your worth, knowing how you should be treating yourself that way, and allowing yourself to glow. And then as a result of that, you do move like water because you're kind of detached from the outcomes of these uh situations more so than if you're in your masculine and you're like, I need to make this work. You're like, I know what I'm worth. Like I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna
Yeah.
treat myself with a certain level of respect and love. Um, and what comes of that will come of that, you know. And that's when you allow the masculine to come forward because he sees and respects that, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I absolutely love how you describe that. Yeah, tapping into your feminine allows you to trust, and that's a big sort of thing to contemplate when you're in a relationship, but also when you're single. Like, how much do you trust that love is going to happen for you? How much do you trust that you're going to have a good relationship? How much do you trust that you're worthy of the love that you're receiving? And you're so right, because ultimately, like, the masculine wants to provide, the masculine wants to look after you, take care of you, treat the feminine. But you need to allow, if you're chasing that, you're not in your feminine, because you're not allowing yourself to lean
Mm,
back. um
mm,
it's just such an interesting like way of thinking about it, and I'm so glad that more people are thinking about it like this now, because at the time when I was doing all this work on myself, when I was single, I didn't realize that I was tapping into my feminine. But now I look back and I was like, wow, the way I was when I met my partner was so like, I know that love is going to happen for me, and I'm going to be open to
mm,
it, but I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to be treated like shit again. Like, it was really that energy.
mm.
And,
Wow.
that came from that feminine trust.
Yeah, and it's something that is just so like heartbreakingly absent among women at the moment is the awareness that and just the trust and the faith in themselves and in like I mean, I don't know like what everyone's sense of faith is, whether that's universe, God, any sort of religion, but just having faith mostly in yourself that you have like the capacity to be loved and to give love, and that it will eventually happen for you, given that you like have faith in that, you know. So yeah, but what I really wanted to ask you was about, I suppose, something that you probably come into contact with quite a lot is when people go through like really heart-wrenching breakups and how that affects their sense of worth, but also their future relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Breakups are traumatic. Um,
Mm,
and they need to be kind of consciously dealt with, which is a lot of jargon for, you can't just say everything's going to be fine, because you are going to
mm,
integrate the experience into your life. But I mean, the first thing is like, if you're going through a breakup right now, and this is, probably not the easiest advice to kind of take on, but it is going to take time, like, and allowing yourself that time. And again, that's tapping into that
mm,
feminine, trusting that if you give this time, it will come through, rather than trying to fix yourself immediately, allowing yourself to
mm,
feel and go through that whole process. Then the sort of things you need to be thinking about is, what are you making this breakup mean about you? So I
mm,
have worked with clients who've had breakups, and it's meant that they are a failure. They failed, you know,
mm,
even when it wasn't their fault, even when the partner was unfaithful, they were wrong. They failed. And what that meant is then they were impacting their self-worth. And then going on to date, they're dating from this place of like, I failed, and I think already a lot of single women, especially, if they're heading into their 30s, late 30s, 40s, they already feel like, if they're single, that they've failed. So being really mindful of the sort of meaning that you attribute to a breakup, and really just taking the time to focus on yourself. I mean, it's such a challenging one, and it's one that, it really requires like individual support for a breakup, because everyone's going to process it differently. But time, being aware of what you're making it mean about you, and making it mean about love as well. Because sometimes if you've gone through a breakup, you'll make that mean that love always ends, or love always results in being hurt, or love always results in betrayal of trust, if someone's had an affair. And when you start to make these meanings, which is natural, it's human nature, you're gonna form those connections because your brain's gonna think like, oh my God, fuck, that was so painful. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again. So we're going to make it mean that this is going to happen again. So avoid dating altogether. Avoid ever getting yourself in that situation. So be really mindful about what you're making it mean. And about yourself, about love, about relationships, and really just taking the time to create the sort of support network that you need around you, because usually your partner is such a big form of your support network, and if that's being taken from you, you need to start to create that elsewhere, whether that's forming new friendships, whether that's creating new hobbies, habits, morning routines. I know it sounds like these are such silly things, but you need to start creating a sort of lifestyle and connection with people that's going to support you through that process. Those are the sort of things that I'd really be thinking about if someone's going through a breakup right now. And also, if it's a really painful breakup, I would also recommend really just cutting all sorts of connection with that person. If it's like a really amicable and you're actually feeling okay with it, it's a little bit sad and you still want to be friends, that's different. But if you've been blindsided in any way or hurt in any way, and you don't have, say, children together or a mortgage together or whatever it is, try to really minimize how much you're seeing of their life, how much you're exposed to their energy, and really just try and go inwards in this time.
It's so difficult as well when you witness obviously going through it, but also just witnessing people you love going through it, because you can never really take away that pain. You can just like hold their hand, and the same as a coach, I guess, like you can't take away the pain is that person's lesson, but the only thing you can do is hold their hand, really, which is hard. So another thing that I wanted to touch on was your kind of take on relationships and people being unfaithful, and like how whether or not that's more prominent now, and like how can you maybe avoid that, I guess, within a relationship?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know the statistics behind it. I can see two arguments. I know what the people who say that, because of social media, we have access to more people. I know there's going to be that school of thought, which is going to be like, well, yeah, people are more unfaithful now because they've got all these other people on their fingertips. But then I also think about times where it was very acceptable to have multiple mistresses, so there's always a balance of give and take. And honestly, I guess my response to it would be like, person that you're with, the person that you choose, you've got to have these conversations with to begin with, to understand your expectations. You've got to have that base level of trust. You can't go into any relationship with 100% guarantee that no one's ever going to slip up or nothing's ever going to go wrong. You can't, but you can know what the other person's expectations are on it, what your expectations are on it, what constitutes cheating as well. Like, is cheating flirting? Is cheating liking someone's picture? I wouldn't really like either of those two things. Or is cheating literally having sex with someone else? You've got to understand what your sort of expectations are around it. And then, the truth is, like, a lot of the times when it comes to infidelity, it's more, a lot of couples can come back from it. A lot of couples can't. Everyone's different. And more often than not, the infidelity is not to do with the person who's being cheated on. It's more to do with the person who's doing the cheating, in the sense that, you know, it's typically their own sort of insecurity. And I'm not saying it's right, like it's totally not right in any way, but I say that for anyone who maybe is blaming themselves for their experience of being cheated on. It's usually not because of you or anything you've done. It's usually because of that person. And, you know, whatever kind of validation that they're seeking from somewhere else. But the truth is, like, it's a non-negotiable for me in my relationship. If it happened, I'd walk away, because I am not someone who I have such a strong faith in monogamy that I feel like if that person's not able to offer that in return, that I will be able to find that from someone else. So really seeking that out, you know, seeking that out, having that expectation, knowing what the person's values are as well. Like if someone's values are, you know, just having as much fun and living life to the extreme and going out every night, you know, things like that, or versus someone's values who are, you know, very family orientated, wanting to believes in like a traditional structure or whatever it is, you're going to see their sort of different associations on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So it happens, it does happen. It's such a challenging one, and it's really, you know, you've got to decide for yourself, like, would that be a deal breaker for you? You know, it would for me. But also, like I said, you've got to know define it as well. And also, you know, ask that question to your partner, like, what's their experience of it? Like, what are their kind of the family sort of values that they've been taught? Like, you know, I've really grown up in a family of everyone around me, I guess, like my parents and, you know, things like that have always been in very committed relationships. So really understanding that as well. But then saying that, you know, it's not like one size fits all of who someone's expectation is going to be. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say in a nutshell. I mean, I wouldn't let myself, if I was single, think that, you know, if you've got a belief like all men cheat, you know, that might have been something you've experienced, that might have been something you've seen, that might have been something you've been taught by, you know, a parent or something. That's going to hold you back, because you're not going to want to be in relationships. And if you are, you're already kind of predicting the outcome. So you're usually we're probably actually more prone, like it's like confirmation bias. We'll be like looking to prove ourselves right. So really working on that belief too.
Yeah, 100%. And okay, so lastly then, what would you say to, because I know there's a lot of men in my field, I don't know what I feel about this yet, but there's a lot of men in my field that kind of preach the idea that men have different urges to women. So women have the urge to like kind of nest and create a family, and so monogamy suits us better. But for men, their urges are different, and like they want to spread the seed, and like that's their maybe like instincts, as it were. And like my old reaction to that would have been that to me that is an expression of a young man who hasn't quite managed to grow up and understand the value of monogamy and having a family and like being loyal to that family. But now I'm just like kind of exploring the idea. Like I'm very open to anyone's opinion. So I wondered what yours was.
I love this question because I studied psychology at university, and my favorite topic in psychology was evolutionary psychology. And it's just so fascinating because the way we've evolved, you know, we have babies that are born very like prematurely and compared to like other mammals, you know, like horses can stand, for example, when they're born, or foals. So we need a lot of buy-in from, you know, or we did when we were evolving from the sort of the male. We needed someone to provide for us. We're going to go through 9 months of pregnancy, then have to have the responsibility of a child for like at least, you know, I mean, we had more of a village community then as well. That's, you know, worth touching on. But for the men, it was like, I have to make sure that if I'm going out putting all of my energy into supporting this child and this woman who's with my child, I have to make sure it's my child from like a biological standpoint. They want to protect their genetics, and we want to have someone who's going to provide for us. So it's a really interesting topic, but we can see the result of all of our kind of, you know, experiences through evolution, through religion, through, you know, all of these different sorts of things, that monogamy has become the norm. And you've got to think, okay, why has it become the norm? Like, has this been set up by humans? Because actually, this is what benefits the tribe the most. This is what benefits the collective the most. You know, why is marriage there? Like, I'm just kind of thinking of it right now on the spot. Why has this always been? And it's also worth thinking about the fact that the term monogamy has actually changed. It used to be monogamy meant you were with one person for your whole life. Monogamy now means you're with one person at a time. So it's a really interesting discussion. So I guess what I would say to those people are, there's going to be people, regardless, there's going to be men, regardless of their age, whether they're 18 or 60, who their main drive is to spread their seed and they don't want to have a long-term relationship. But equally, there's going to be men who want to protect their offspring and have that family unit. And, you know, not even just from an evolutionary perspective, but from a social perspective as well. We also see a lot of research around men who are married in being more successful, you know, by having that kind of long-term partner support. We also see that people who have relationships have better health and live longer because they've got that support. So there's a lot of like advantages for us being in a monogamous relationship, you know. It's a really interesting question. And to be honest, like if someone was saying, you know, to be really blunt, like if a guy was telling me that their calling is to spread their seed and they have different urges, I literally just say, okay, you do that, because there's going to be some like, you know, it kind of just sounds like you just want to sleep around. So go for it. Just do it on your own time, you know, like I would just not allow myself to make that mean that that's all guys, you know, that's all men, because it's not. And the same way, like I think we do have maternal instincts. Our body is designed to reproduce, and we do need someone. Well, we did need someone. We don't actually now need someone, you know, because the dynamics have changed so much, where we make our own money, we can work, we have maternity leave, we can have a child by ourselves. We don't necessarily need someone supporting our offspring anymore. But typically historically, that's what we needed. And that's, you know, also a lot, you know, now that family unit works quite well for that reason, if you're having children. But yeah, it's such an interesting one. I would just say, you know what, there's always going to be people who want to have different experiences. Everyone's going to be different, but there's going to be people who want to have the same experience you have. And there's got to be a reason why our society's been set up this way. You know, does it benefit us better? That's a really fascinating question for me. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that.
I suppose the thing that came to mind as you were talking was the fact that the people who have like kind of said that have been people who in my head have been looking to justify being able to cheat in a long-term relationship. And like it's like just using that as a crutch of like, well, you know, we just have different urges as men. And it's like there has to be an accountability that comes into it. Like I do understand, and I'm not taking away from the fact that men probably do have different urges, and I will never understand that because I'm not a man. I do think that it comes from this kind of immature voice that maybe it wants to justify that sort of behavior. But also the men that I've spoken to that are maybe a little bit older or a little bit more emotionally mature have understood that when they've been sleeping around or cheating on their partner, it's the most lonely they've ever felt, because they've then been absent of a connection with someone who is loyal to them and cares about them and would do anything for them. And like only when they've kind of gone through that and they've maybe lost something that they really cared about in terms of a relationship, did they actually wake up and go, oh, was that actually worth it? Like, was that urge that I had, if I'd just been able to kind of sit with it and just allow it to be there and then move forward, as you do with any other urge that maybe you don't want to act upon. Yeah, I wonder what direction this will take, especially in my own life.
It's such an interesting question. I do think you've hit the nail on the head around that maturity piece. You know, ultimately, if you're not comfortable with your partner cheating and they're telling you it's because of their urges, I would say maybe it's time to get a new partner, because because you're not going to be happy. And
Yeah,
you know,
that's so
they're not
true.
going to be able to meet your needs, you know, and there are going to be people out there who are going to meet your needs and are going to say like what they want is a monogamous relationship. You know, there's also kind of an interesting school of thought, like from an evolutionary perspective, that what men fear more is their partner having sex with someone else, whereas what women fear more is their partner having an emotional affair with someone else. Because in the sort of evolutionary times, going back to like the offspring, it's like if a female's partner suddenly fell in love with the other lady, his resources would be going into her, not her and her baby. Whereas from the male partner, it would be like if the female had slept with another male, they would be putting all their resources into someone who's not genetically theirs. So it's kind of interesting. But you know, all of these things are, you know, we don't live like cavemen anymore. We are not in tribes. You know, all of these things are fascinating. But you know, what I've always learned is like, yeah, don't let anyone make you feel like you have to let them do anything that you're not comfortable with.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. And that's a lovely note to finish on. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it so much.
Thank you so much. I feel like I've had so much food for thought. I'm like buzzing.
Me too, me too. So for those who are listening, where can they find you?
Yeah, so Instagram's the best place. So I'm at @IamPippaMay_. So that's the best place to find me, and then you can have a browse.
Amazing. Yeah, and in terms of Women Who podcast, I'm going to be interviewing and uploading a new episode every single week with people that inspire me. So yes, thank you, Pippa, for being here. I've had such an amazing time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, darling.